I mean, certainly historically, there has been some misalignment between the amount of loans that students took and their realistic expectations for earning money and repaying those loans. I can think of specific fields, I'm not going to name them, in which doctoral students were encouraged to take loans. And based upon employment prospects and the salaries paid, there's no realistic expectation they're going to be able to repay those loans. Now that was a combination of missteps on a variety from a variety of people. I think from the students who didn't think carefully about their situation, from faculty and others who may have encouraged them to get these loans, and from a university and federal administration that enabled them to get these loans without the prospects of repayment.
Thank you, Dr. Glover. Dr. Glover, you became an Interim Provost this past September after being a couple of months or weeks in University of Arizona as a provost there. But before, you were the University of Florida provost for 15 years. So you've been quite a while. I think you've also had other positions. For example, the Associate Provost of Academic Affairs, Interim Associate Dean, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and you are a professor in mathematics. And you served in the also as a chair of the mathematics department for some time, for a couple of years. So thank you for being here. I think as I told you, the first couple of things that I wanted to kind of explore with you is what is the role of the provost, right? Like very basic. As you know, sometimes the most public role is the president, and sometimes the provost is like an unsung hero behind screens, like doing a lot of the work that maybe doesn't get too recognized sometimes. So what in your mind is the provost? What are your responsibilities? What are your pressures? Who do you have to keep in mind when you're making decisions?
So the provost is normally thought of as the chief academic officer of the university. And so in that sense, the deans report to the provost on academic matters. We're responsible for student success, which is a very big part of it. We partner with the vice president for research in promoting the research programs of the university. And basically, the role of the provost is to support the president in advancing the strategic agenda of the university.
Okay. So what does that mean exactly? Like, for example, I know you said that you work a lot with the deans. For example, something that came up in my mind while you're speaking is, okay, you set these goals every so often, academic goals, for example, and you try to achieve them somehow, right? For example, one of the goals that you've set is that you wanted to increase the ranking of UF, and you've managed to do so, right? Like on the time that you've been here, UF rose from, I think, top 20 to top 5 public university. So how does that work? Like when you're talking with the deans and you say, let's increase the rankings, do you just I imagine that you tell them something more than that, right? Like what how does that work?
So the university is measured in many different ways. Okay, there is a set of metrics that the rankings look at, and there are different rankings, so they all look at different metrics. And then the state of Florida has its own set of metrics called the performance-based funding metrics that we're also responsible for. So, one of the tricky things is to optimize the appropriate mix of these metrics. And sometimes the metrics are in conflict, so you can't actually optimize all of them simultaneously. It's impossible to do. So you have to pick your goals and objectives. In general, the University of Florida has focused on two things over the past 15, 20 years, and that has been the U.S. News and World Report ranking and the Florida Board of Governors performance-based funding metrics.
Yeah, how does that work? Like when in the metrics, for example, could you speak a little bit more in depth on metrics related to academics, specifically when you're saying, for example, the idea of the university is to do excellent research, to advance the field in many things. What does that mean when you say you're trying to do that? How do you measure that?
Well, academics means a couple of different things, right? There's the education
teaching,
of the
yes,
students,
and education, absolutely, yeah.
And there are metrics that look at how effectively we do that. What is our graduation rate after 4 or 6 years? What is our retention rate after 1 year? Do students go out and continue on to jobs or graduate school? Do they get good salaries? Those are some examples of the metrics that we look at that are related to student success. Then, if you want to talk about research, there are metrics that are related to research. Probably the most important one is the dollars that are brought in from competitive external grants and awards. And that oftentimes is thought of as a proxy for the quality for the quality of university research, because if you have very good faculty who are proposing and doing very good research projects, then agencies will respond by giving you more money to do that work.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be tricky, right? For example, you could say that, but if it's only money that you bring in, you could have brought $1 billion in research, which you did, or the university achieved last year, but all of that money was spent on partying or was spent on whatever, right? So
well, if it was spent on partying, then you're not going to get it the next year.
Exactly. Okay, so metrics sometimes can be tricky, and sometimes you can over-optimize the metrics, but hopefully, like, the idea is for the metrics to tell you something, right? Because sometimes, for example, like in academics, I know like H-index of faculty, you could do like an average H-index in your department or something that could also be exploited, right? And not necessarily increase like the rigor of research.
And none of these metrics are perfect. So for example, in terms of measuring the quality of the research done here, we just talked about money, external contracts brought in as a proxy for the quality. But we should recognize that there are certain fields that have the potential to get money. The medical fields, in general, STEM fields. Mm-hmm. But when you move into the social sciences and the humanities, there's much, much less money, and sometimes no money that's available at all. And so as a consequence, that particular proxy, dollars raised, doesn't work very well as an assessment of the research that you're doing in those fields.
Yeah, so how does that work? For example, I know that you, for example, have the ability and the power to choose the deans of the colleges, right? Like, how do you do that? When you say, for example, I have to choose the dean of engineering, I have to choose the dean of the Hamilton School, right? Like, which is like political science, things like that. So very different things that you're not necessarily an expert on, at least in the specific fields. How do you do that? Like, what does it mean to pick the right person, for example, in those situations?
Like just as the provost has a broad range of responsibilities and a very broad portfolio, each dean does as well, right? So you need to pick a dean who can do multiple things simultaneously. First, the dean needs to be able to manage the college, right? That means managing the budget and managing the people in the college. And right there, you have two major tasks. But then you would also like a dean who would be able to establish a vision for the college and lead the faculty, staff, and students in that college to sort of new horizons or greater heights for the college. You know, establish exciting research programs, establish programs that the students will be interested in. And so, you know, that requires a certain skill set. And you're right, I don't have the capability to know every field intimately myself, but when we interview for deans, then those deans visit a variety of stakeholders on campus. They would visit the vice president for research, the vice president for advancement to find out if they're going to be effective fundraisers. You know,
like mini interviews in a sense, right?
Excuse me?
Mini interviews.
There are many interviews. And so the assessments of those people are gathered. And then, of course, we have to make a judgment about which person is going to be most effective. But we do try and measure their qualities and their abilities along these multiple dimensions.
Right. How does that work in terms of finding those skills, right? Like, for example, when you're interviewing a potential candidate for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, sometimes it's kind of hard. Is there any insights that you can get on what does it mean, or how can you spot a good leader in those settings?
Well, you look for their experiences. Number one, what have they led before. You look for how they relate to people, their ideas, their style of interacting with people, and you try to find the right fit. Right, somebody who's very good in one college may not be a good fit in another college. So you need to have them talk to a variety of people and get an assessment from different angles before you make that decision.
Another goal that you've said is that you wanted to ensure working with the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of the University of Florida, and try to prioritize where the budget goes, right? So that it's aligned with the academic needs that the university have. You've been here for a long time. What is the main driver behind when you get this amount of funding or budget and this other amount of budget? And that's the first one. And once you have the budget, and you said you have these conversations with the CFO, for example, how do you make the tough decisions? So, for example, which department to cut if there's a need for that, something like that, right? Because that has happened, right? Like, for example, I saw when I was looking at the things that you've done that happened while you were here is that, for example, the Office of Sustainability was closed, right? So how does those decisions happen? And
yeah, so that was not my decision.
For sure.
That particular one. But as I tell people, nothing demonstrates your priorities more than where you spend your budget. Mm-hmm. Okay, you can have all the lofty words and all the lofty goals and all the rhetoric that you want, but in the end, people will look at how you spend your money and say, "Oh, that's the real set of priorities, right? Is how you spend the money." So I think it's really important to identify what you want to accomplish or what your set of priorities are, and then make sure that you allocate money in accordance with those priorities. And so I think it's a constant conversation, me with the CFO, the deans with the CFO, the other vice presidents. We're all talking constantly about what are the university's priorities, where are we going to place the money, what goals do we want to achieve, and how best can we strategically invest in those priorities.
Yes, could you talk on the first question? How do those constraints get set on the first place? What determines what even is the budget for this specific year, so that when you have to make those decisions of let me talk to this person and try to set this specific budget aligned to our priorities.
Yeah, so budget comes from a few different sources, right? There's tuition, which students are paying. There is the legislative subvention, right? Each year we get an appropriation of money from the legislature. And then there are other more constrained sources. The tuition and the state money, in principle, we can use that for any purpose. Mm-hmm. It's pretty free for the president and the board to allocate as they'd like. But then you go into areas like research. Research dollars are given for a specific purpose, right? And you're constrained to use it for that purpose. Money that's raised by the University of Florida Foundation from donors, 99% of it is dedicated to a specific purpose. So, you have streams of money with great flexibility. You have other streams of money that are very limited flexibility. So what we focus on mostly, therefore, are the streams of money with flexibility, because those can be used for any purpose in principle. And so, once again, colleges earn, and I put that in air quotes, a certain amount of money by their activities. Okay, namely, how many students are they educating? What do they need to run the college? And then they can be supplemented to do other special projects or things that are really going to advance either the college or the university. Those are more subjective decisions. But a lot of the money that they earn is sort of formulaic.
Okay. You talk to students, you talk about the tuition. How does setting up the right amount of people that are coming in work? Like how do you determine how many, like the size of the class of 2027? Because that will determine the budget that you bring in from tuition, right?
Although because Florida has one of the lowest tuitions in the nation, which really hasn't increased. Yeah. In-state tuition really hasn't increased in the past 12 years, I think. So the tuition brought in by the students doesn't change the overall university budget that much. So adding an extra 50 or 100 students doesn't dramatically change your fortunes, okay? But so when we talk about what should the size of the class be, for many years the class was set at about 6,500 or 6,700 as the goal. Okay. Last year that was changed to 7,500 because there was a lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty.
75,000?
No, 7,500, right? The freshman class was about 7,500.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, it was just 70,000, like, or 50 is like the overall size of the university, something like that, right? Something like that.
The student body's about 55, 60,000.
Right, something like that. Yeah. Sorry.
But we decided to raise the freshman class from 6,700 to about 7,500 because there was a lot of uncertainty both at the state level and at the federal level and student flows. And so we decided to buffer that uncertainty by enlarging the class slightly. That was a conversation among admissions, the provost's office, the board of trustees, and the president. So that was really a collective conversation.
Right, because those impact, for example, metrics that you also want to optimize. For example, an important one that I've heard is the student-to-faculty ratio.
Right, and that's an example of a metric that we have to keep in the back of our minds, that we don't want to enlarge the university so much that the student-faculty ratio gets out of whack.
You mentioned tuition. I wanted to speak specifically, why do you think, not in UF, because as you said, at UF, I would say, and many people would agree, that you get the best value for your money, in a sense, right? Like the top schools that are in the US, UF just has an incredibly low tuition. However, the tuition has been increased like significantly over the past few years, at least in other universities. Why does that happen? Like, for example, there's many things that people consider are the culprits, or you should blame this, you should blame that. For example, people have said an increasing size of the administrative body, right? And other people have said just that students are getting more amenities, right? Like students are getting more spoiled, the university experience, that increasingly people want the experience gets more expensive, right? So what are those causes?
So I think when you talk about the finances of universities, you have to separate universities into two buckets that operate very, very differently.
Public and private.
There are the private universities, right, that in principle operate based on tuition and their own resources, and then there are the public universities which operate on tuition and usually a subsidy from the state. Okay, and what's happened in many states for the public universities over the past 15 or 20 years is that states have decreased their subvention or their allocation to the university. And as a consequence, the universities have been constrained to raise tuition. Now, we have been very fortunate in Florida in that has not happened. The state has been very generous in subventing the cost of higher education here. And they have had a pretty plain goal to keep tuition low for Florida residents. And so that's why in Florida the situation has been stable, whereas in other states, I'm not going to name them, but you can go and look at the statistics. You will see that the percentage of state subsidy to the universities went down monotonically over a number of years. And again, that puts some pressure on the university budgets. And as a consequence, they have increased tuition in many instances. So that is one main reason for tuition increases in the public universities. In the private universities, everything is tuition generated, right, to first level of approximation. And so whenever the private universities need to do anything, like raising salaries of faculty and staff or increasing graduate student stipends or whatever it may be, they can only turn to tuition.
Is there any truth to the ones that I mentioned in your mind? For example, the number of amenities that students have gotten and the size of the administration. That I think there's some charts that say, okay, students' body have increased this much, faculty has increased this much, and administration has been increasing this increasingly. Is there a room, for example, for a metric if there's a concern for like administrative to student ratio or something like that?
Yeah, this is. There has been some administrative growth in universities. A lot of it is driven by requirements from the federal government and in some cases, from state government. But in fact, UF has been very good. We don't believe we have so-called administrative bloat here. I can't really speak to other universities because I don't know their particular situations.
Okay. Another sort of tricky subject that a couple of people think about and I think about too is how do you balance the interest of the state population, the interest of the US population, the interest of the world in a sense, right? Like, because you bring in both students and graduate students, so like researchers in a sense, from all of those three. And there's some tension in there, right? Because, for example, I would say sort of increasingly, at least in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, that order comes with like money that brings to the university, right? Like, for example, in my mind, in-state residents paid much less compared to out-of-state residents. And in a sense, also when looking at the research side, for example, or like the graduate students, I would imagine international students bring in a good amount of money too, just because, for example, it tends to be that the people that come here are the people that can afford it, and the people that have money that just tend to be like wealthier people abroad. What do you think?
That's both true and false. What you're saying. Are you a graduate assistant?
I'm a graduate assistant.
You're a graduate assistant, so you bring no money to the University of Florida,
absolutely,
right? Because your tuition is waived.
I'm getting paid. Yes.
So I think we need to go back to and talk about the mission of the University of Florida. Okay, the University of Florida has a couple of missions that are very, very important. First of all, it is a land-grant university. And in the United States, there is a system of land-grant universities that were created after the Civil War. And their purpose was really to educate what was known at the time as the blue-collar population, the workers of the state. And the land-grant mission is really understood as an obligation of the university to assist the middle class in the state and the nation, and by extension, the world. Okay, so we don't see the mission of the University of Florida as being limited to the state of Florida. Certainly, that's our primary responsibility, but we believe we have a larger one, which is to the nation more generally, and then to some extent to the world. The second mission, which is very important to the university, is as a big research university. We are a member of the AAU, the Association of American Universities. It's a group of North American universities that prides itself on its research accomplishments. And so when you consider those two missions sort of rolled up into one, yes, our obligation is to educate the citizenry of the state of Florida, number one. Okay, but how do you best do that? Do you really educate the students in Florida if all they see are Floridians? Right. I mean, most of them
Yeah.
have grown up here and they've only seen Floridians, right?
Yeah,
They don't have
absolutely, yeah.
exposure to the world.
Yeah.
So we think one of our responsibilities is to bring them to the University of Florida and let them experience people from other states in the United States and other countries of the world, because this should be part of their education and it should prepare them to go out into the world and to succeed, in business or education, whatever it is they want to do. That's point number one. Point number two is that because we are a research university and we are trying to make new discoveries that will benefit the state and the nation and the world and really push the frontiers of what is known, we want the best talent to come here and to work here, right? And so we look far and wide for the best talent, and we don't limit necessarily to the state of Florida or the United States. We take from around the world. And so particularly at the graduate level, there are a lot of people who come here from different countries who are very talented, or graduate students who want to learn about things. And some of them come on their own and actually do pay tuition, but others, like graduate research assistants, get their tuition waived, right? Now, so why do we want you? Because you're not bringing any money here, but you're bringing your talent and you're helping the faculty who are here to advance the research projects. And we hope and we expect that as you get educated here, you will either join the United States labor force and help to advance the United States, or you will return to your country, but you will have established relationships with the University of Florida and with the United States that ultimately will profit us. So it is a complex system, and it's not all financially based. It's interwoven with the other aspects of our mission.
In talent, as you said, for example. But are there tensions when it comes to the financials? For example, would you say that's accurate to say, for example, that people from abroad sort of could be willing to get a lower salary compared to it? Because that's, for example, like conversations that are happening in the H-1B visa, for example. And like how many people they bring from abroad, do they have incentives to work for lower wages, and then based on market forces, wages gonna get decreased, for example, because you bring in those people. And I'm not even sure, like, for example, how much flexibility even is there for for those market forces to set, for example, like the salary of a graduate assistant that, from what my understanding, is pretty fixed.
No, I mean, when we recruit graduate students, if you're a graduate student in a foreign country and you're thinking about coming to an American university to do graduate work, you're looking at a variety of universities across the country, right? And you can compare the money that you would get in each. And then you have to make a judgment call, right? Where are you going to get the best education and the best support simultaneously? And so that's a balance that you have to figure out in your own mind. So we are actually in an ecosystem of competing for very good graduate students. So we could not set your graduate stipend at $5,000 per year and expect to be able to recruit the best and the brightest of the graduate students. Yeah. So we have to be competitive if we're going to recruit very good graduate students.
So there is a good amount of, for example, market competition between University of Florida and the University of Illinois and Harvard and University of Singapore.
Absolutely. And we look at their graduate stipends, and we know we have to calibrate ours to be competitive.
Right. Awesome. I think another question that I wanted to ask is, it's kind of a weird question, but we were talking about financials. We're talking, I will leave it as that, but who currently goes to college who should not go to college?
That is purely a matter of philosophy.
For sure.
In the United States. I think everyone should go to college.
Okay.
But I know there are people in the United States who don't believe that, right? Who have a different philosophy about who should go to college. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that. It's just a philosophy about what you think it means to be someone who's capable of participating in a complex civilization like the United States and be fully capable of participating in the democracy. And I think that being, having gone to college is a great thing. It opens you up to new horizons and helps you to learn to think critically and analytically and be better able to exercise your rights and duties as a citizen.
And how about practically?
What do you mean practically?
Like in practice, are there people that you would not recommend to go to college, for example?
No.
For example, because when I'm thinking, sometimes I have this in my head, tell me your personal opinion, because that's sort of what I'm interested in, are there people that, for example, say, oh, I am expecting, and I phrase it like that just to emphasize on expectation, I'm expecting that I'll be making, for example, this amount of dollars after I graduate from college. Therefore, for me to go to college, I'll take this amount of loans, for example. And I'm choosing also specifically this X degree. And maybe the expectation was incorrect because the actual reality of market forces playing out. And then after you graduate, you earn this amount of money that is not maybe the right amount of money you should have earned for you to pay that loan that you got, right? Like, for example. So how do you think about those situations yourself?
So we try to provide students with a lot of information so that if your primary objective is to make such and such amount of money when you graduate from college, and therefore you're choosing this field and you need to take out this many loans, then we try to provide you with the appropriate information. Okay, what are the employment opportunities in this field? What is actually the salary that is paid to people in that field? How easy is it to enter that field? What credentials do you need? And then, you can figure out how much in loans you want to invest into doing that. So it is, we do try and provide the information so that students can calculate that. Right, yeah. But, my argument to students would be, again, this is my personal opinion that I know not everyone shares.
Please. Yeah.
The point of college is not to get you to a specific degree making so much money a year. Okay? Because in fact, as you say, the job market changes. It changes constantly, right?
Yes.
Right now, AI is coming on the field, and that seems to be changing a certain number of fields and employment opportunities and jobs. So I think the point of college is it provides you with an education, again, the critical thinking and analytical skills, and it should provide you with the flexibility and resilience for you to pivot. Okay, if your field is changing, you need to be able to change with the field.
Yeah.
If your field is collapsing, you need to be able to recognize that and be able to switch to another field. So, I do think it depends on your goals, but in my mind, and maybe I'm old-fashioned that way, that's what I think college is designed to do.
No, yeah, and that's terrific because it is the reality. Like, we're in an ever-changing world that there's just like innovation happening all across us rapidly, and that sometimes can be very scary. As you know, one of the main concerns of, for example, the AI boom that we've seen is, okay, but it'll replace the jobs of these people, right? Like call center employees, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Is hopefully if a person ended up in that position and the job is being replaced, because that happens when new technology comes and things are moving, hopefully you'll be able to adapt to that, find some other way, contribute some other way, and get your living in another way. So, but do you think that there is some tension in there, like some disagreement on average, sort of, for example, like people's expectations to the reality of what they end up getting at the end? Because as you know, like there's a lot of fights for student loans, right? Like that people end up getting in these huge debts that are incredibly difficult to pay out.
Certainly historically there has been some misalignment between the amount of loans that students took and their realistic expectations for earning money and repaying those loans. I can think of specific fields, I'm not going to name them, in which doctoral students were encouraged to take loans. And based upon employment prospects and the salaries paid, there's no realistic expectation they're going to be able to repay those loans. Now that was a combination of missteps on a variety from variety of people. I think from the students who didn't think carefully about their situation, from faculty and others who may have encouraged them to get these loans, and from a university and federal administration that enabled them to get these loans without the prospects of repayment. So I would encourage every student, if you're going into a field, to explore the job prospects and the salaries in that field. And again, through the Career Connection Center, we make a lot of information available. You can understand what the national demand is for certain fields, what the salaries are, what the job prospects are, and you should be aware of that as you choose to chart your course through college. I think you should also be aware that, if you're going to be a nuclear engineer, and you want to live in Gainesville, Florida, the options are very limited, right? You're not going to prosper as a nuclear engineer living in Gainesville, Florida. So sometimes in order to get those salaries that you'll see in the statistics, you have to be willing to relocate and to move. And that's another thing that people don't often think about. If what is it if you grew up in Florida and you want to remain in Florida, well, what's in Florida? Again, I'm think nuclear engineering in Florida, there are some jobs, but not a lot. Not a lot.
Yeah, and I like the way that you phrase it, because of course there's holes in there in a sense that, for example, we are sort of asking 18-year-olds to make these judgment calls, right? And as you and I know, 18-year-olds are not necessarily regarded as like the best decision makers, right? So it's tough, but I agree with you like that. Even if it's not perfect, you should seek as much information as you can. You should try to inform yourself and try to make the best decision. And if the decision does not work out, then try to adapt. But the
other thing that college is good for is to allow students to explore.
Yeah.
Right? When you come here,
absolutely. Many people come in with like unspecified majors and things like that. Yeah.
If you come to the University of Florida out of an American high school, you only know a few subjects. You've heard of, English and history and mathematics and chemistry, but there are lots of what we call found majors, things you've never heard of that you could have a wonderful life pursuing. And I think that's something that students should also think about at the University of Florida is, what are the things I've never really known about or thought about? And, could I spend my life doing that?
One of those things is artificial intelligence, in a sense, right? Like, maybe not now because it's in the news everywhere, but it's like one of these weird things that you don't really know where it came from, and then it changed a lot of things. UF has poured a lot of resources into this. We have a wonderful building and a wonderful resource on Hypergator, like the supercomputer that we can do all of this research. I like specifically, you wrote a piece, I'm forgetting the title, but basically looking at where AI has been positive, where it has maybe missed the mark a little bit. I wanted to get your personal perspective on sort of like those pros and cons of this field. Like, for example, you wrote that people, for example, focus too much on how to circumvent the labor-saving advantages of AI, so we can cling to old teaching practices, right? That's one, right? But of course, at the same time, you could say that, for example, students are losing the sense of accomplishment from tackling the challenges and like basically like just making the AI thing for themselves, right? So how do you see this field playing out in your mind? Like,
so a couple of points. Again, to go back to the primary purpose of the university, what do we do here? We take 18-year-olds and we try to complete their brains. Okay, we know physiologically the brain of an 18-year-old is not yet mature, and so what we're trying to do here is to foster the critical thinking skills, the analytical skills, the problem-solving skills that hopefully will make them productive members of society. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, there has never been a piece of technology invented that was not used. Okay. If you have a tool,
useful, right,
if you have a tool at hand, you're going to use it. Right? And so I think that is certainly the case with artificial intelligence.
It is useful.
It was. You're too young to remember. It was the case when the personal computer revolution came around in the mid '80s. It was the case when scientific calculators came around. And you can go back through history with every technological advance. So let's understand that AI is here. People are going to use it. Now, the challenge for the faculty in the university is we want to continue to foster the intellectual growth of 18-year-olds, right, and help them develop these skills. So in the presence of this really powerful tool, which is known as AI, how do you do this? And so I think that faculty need to go back to fundamentals and ask themselves that question. For example, why did we assign essays, right? For decades, hundreds of years probably, we assigned an essay. And we did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it tested your content knowledge. It tested your ability to do independent research, to find the facts. It tested your ability to organize.
Communicate clearly.
And communicate. And doing all of those things helped you to form those intellectual processes that we were going to do. Now, all of a sudden, you have ChatGPT.
That writes everything for you.
That does a certain number of those steps for you. And so just assigning an essay as a proxy
might not be enough.
Is not going to be enough. Okay, so go back to fundamentals and ask, okay, so how do we do this? So, for example, I'll give you an example. I might assign you an essay on something, and maybe you go and you hit the button and ChatGPT pops something out. But I tell you the next day, okay, now you need to come and we're going to have a conversation about the essay, right? Which means that you need to have total command of what's in that essay. You need to believe it. You need to be able to verify the facts. You need to be able to substantiate it. And so, even in the presence of ChatGPT, I can still find ways to help you seriously think about it, structure it, challenge it, believe it, defend it, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's on the faculty, for example, of trying to go to the fundamentals and think what are we doing, and it's also on the students, right? Like to think maybe the faculty is assigning me this essay for this reason, so it might be just counterproductive for me to use ChatGPT for everything, right? So think about those things, right? We're sort of in the wrapping up stages, but before we finish, I wanted to ask you about, as you mentioned, the state has a big influence on the university. And that comes with the challenges, right? Like, for example, just touching the world of politics, I imagine must be difficult waters to tread as a provost, right? Like, you have pressures on every side, right? For example, an important one is the bill that the governor signed a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago of basically, on a nutshell, banning DEI practices, right? Like, and they worded it in a sense that they wanted to discourage the diversity of the university, and they wanted to discourage the activism. Specifically, they had the word of activism. So like social activism, right? Like, so what I wanted to ask you specifically is like a little bit of the nuance of maybe your personal opinion of what is the difference between scholarly work and activism, right? Because there's some nuance in there, right? Sometimes you do want to explore these topics, but sometimes you could say that, yeah, this person clearly has like some ideological bias that wants to just shove into your throat, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So I think at at the top level, the distinction between scholarship and activism is actually pretty clear.
Okay.
Now there are, you do get into gray areas occasionally, but for example, I'm, maybe discussing some topic in a class, and you have one point of view, and then you have another point of view. And you can discuss both points of view in the class, right? Here are the pros, here are the cons, I'm for, I'm against. But if the faculty member then makes a decision, right, and says to the class, this point of view is the correct one, or this is the one I encourage you to believe in, or this is the one I encourage you to think, or this is the cause you should get behind, that becomes activism, where the professor is imposing his or her own personal views on the student. Okay, and I think that's where discussion and debate shade over into activism.
Yeah, and you could get, for example, philosophical in a sense, and then say, okay, but is the professor saying that the opinion to have is that relativity is a thing, and we work with relativity, or something like that? Or then, in sort of the other spectrum, you could say, yeah, but wouldn't you want to debate about whether relativity is correct or not? Maybe it's not, and then how do you know, right? Like, and things like that.
So the beauty of science, of course, because you mentioned relativity, beauty of science is that you can test truth, right? And at any moment in time, we have tested and we operate according to scientific truth, understanding that at any moment we may get some deeper insight that may overturn our notion of scientific truth. Right, and so that's a slightly different situation.
Right, but you could apply it to, for example, like the social sciences, right? And normally, like politics, it's mostly looking at or concentrated at, right? Like you could say that, okay, there's some debates about whether this is this or this is that, but we could try to test it out. We could try to see somehow find some truth.
There are certainly subjects in the social sciences and more generally life and the humanities that can't be tested, right? That are closely held beliefs, philosophies, points of view, whatever you would like to call them. For example, if you go back to DEI, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, 5 or 10 years ago, there was a point of view about DEI and its utility. Now the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and there is pretty much the opposite point of view. How would you test which philosophy is the correct one?
How do you then determine what to teach, right? Or like how to phrase the teaching? Well,
you can certainly talk about the principles that are involved in DEI, and you can talk about the pros and cons and the philosophies and beliefs that each side adheres to, but you can't come down on one side or the other, because that becomes activism.
Wonderful. Last question, and just pretty briefly, I'll just mention, just for the fun of it, a lot of the accomplishments that you've done, right? Like you left, and then when you left, a lot of people were praising you highly, from all of the deans, assistant provost, because you did a lot, right? Like you, for example, all of the work that you've done with AI, putting the Quest Center, doing the UF Innovation Academy, online learning, PACE, accreditation. You've done a lot. So first, congrats on all of that.
Thank you.
Given your career, given your life, what are you grateful for?
Grateful for in life, or grateful for in my career?
Whatever you want to.
Well, I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to have a stimulating job that has allowed me to paint on a very broad campus. I've worked with wonderful people who've allowed me to go in different directions with different projects, and I think that's an opportunity I've been very fortunate to have that not a lot of people get, quite honestly. So, I always thought that higher education was a wonderful career to pursue, because you could pursue things that interested you and that were ultimately valuable to various groups of people.
Thank you for the work you've done, Dr. Glover.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank you. The distinction between scholarship and activism is actually pretty clear.
Okay.
Now, there are, you do get into gray areas occasionally, but for example, I'm, maybe discussing some topic in a class. You have one point of view, and then you have another point of view. And you can discuss both points of view in the class, right? Here are the pros, here are the cons, I'm for, I'm against. But if the faculty member then makes a decision, right, and says to the class, this point of view is the correct one, or this is the one I encourage you to believe in, or this is the one I encourage you to think, or this is the cause you should get behind, that becomes activism, where the professor is imposing his or her own personal views on the student. Okay, and I think that's where discussion and debate shade over into activism.